December 1943, occupied France. A coal-fired locomotive pounds through blackout country, boiler rumbling, frost clinging to the handrails, the cab lit by an orange firebox glow. Without warning, the engine shudders. A brutal white flash punches out from the fire door, and the boiler tears like a tin can. The fireman vanishes in a wall of steam and flame. The driver claws for the brake as the locomotive bucks off the rails, dragging wagons into a grinding accordion that scatters ammunition crates and winter coats into the dark. By dawn, there is only twisted metal and coal under a skin of icy ash. Investigators pick through the ruin, find no wires, no detonator, nothing but shattered iron and ordinary fuel. This is how a lump of fake coal turned Germany's rail lifeline into a weapon against itself. If the quiet side of war fascinates you more than the loud, subscribe and stay in the cab. By the end, you'll smell the coal dust and feel the trick. Keep your hands inside the tender. This ride burns hot. Before that night, the weakness had been hiding in plain sight. The Reich ran almost everything on rails, and rails ran on coal. Across occupied Europe, coal sat in open piles, in bunkers, in wagons left under guard towers and snow. It was shoveled by the ton under blackout, by men on deadlines, into locomotives that could not move without it. In London, a new organization had been created to pry open the enemy's logistics. The Special Operations Executive began in July 1940 with a simple brief: set Europe ablaze. The directing minds worked from Baker Street, but the disguises were born elsewhere. At the Fryth, in Welwyn Garden City, an SOE workshop called Station 15th served as a factory of tricks. Exploding rats, forged documents, concealment devices that looked like anything except what they were. A question took hold there. What if a charge could look exactly like the fuel the enemy trusted most? Not a bomb in a boxcar, but a bomb the crew would shovel with their own hands. The concept had history, echoing coal torpedoes from the American Civil War. Revived now with better explosives, better molds, and a cooler logic. American partners took the idea too. The newly formed Office of Strategic Services built a version called Black Joe, a dark lump with a hard shell and a temper that woke only in heat. All of this work pointed at the same target. If fuel was everywhere and no one could check it all, then fuel itself could carry the charge in. The obstacle was not explosive chemistry, but camouflage. Real coal came in 1,000 faces: glossy anthracite plates, dull bituminous chunks, layered fractures, mica flecks that caught the light. A convincing piece had to look right on the shovel at arm's length, feel right when slapped into a scuttle, and sound right when dropped into a tender. Technicians at Station 15 solved it by starting with real coal. They took casts from actual lumps, using plaster molds that captured pits, edges, and the micro cracks where dust gathered. The outer shell needed the correct surface, so they mixed ground coal dust with binders to make a skin that did not shine like paint, that took grime, that would dirty a gloved hand. Color was not one color. They learned to stipple the surface with dull grays and sharper blacks, then rub it with dust, then scuff a few edges so it read as used, not new. Weight betrayed fakes, so the core carried ballast besides explosives. Lead shot or compact fillers brought the mass into the band a fireman expected when he scooped a lump the size of his fist. Inside, the main charge sat stable and deaf to casual knocks. Plastic explosives were chosen for malleability and persistence. They did not leak, and they resisted accidental initiation. Ignition demanded patience. A heat-triggered firing train, using a composition that softened or released only after sustained firebox temperatures, ensured the piece would travel, be shoveled, then sit in flame before it burst. A compact detonator and a short delay element added a heartbeat between first lick of fire and blast, so the lump could settle among the coals and the force could couple into the furnace. Every seam had to be invisible. The fill hole was disguised as a natural fracture, then dusted over, then rubbed with real coal to hide any trace of tooling. Testing did not happen on paper. Trial batches were fired in controlled furnaces to check timing, strength, and whether the heat would spall the shell too early or late. Even packaging was thought through. The pieces traveled wrapped in paper sacks of ordinary coal dust, inside tins that would not ring if tapped, and in crates that looked like supplies. There were instructions, clear and strict. Never walk onto a platform and feed a fake directly into a firebox. That made the act traceable, and the agent dead. Instead, seed the flow. Slip a single lump into a coal pile, a bunker, a wagon, or a tender when no one looked. Let railway workers do the rest without knowing. The math favored patience. One piece lost under 10 tons looked like nothing. One shovel in 1,000 would lift it, and some crew far away would face the blast. By going with the grain of logistics, the device turned volume into camouflage. The more coal the Germans moved, the safer the disguise and the broader the reach. The weapon's effects ran beyond broken metal. Because there was no fuse to find and no timer to cut, it denied investigators a story they could close. Steam locomotives were not built to shrug off internal blasts. Fireboxes were lined with stay-bolts and tubes. A shockwave inside could buckle plates, rip tubes, and throw open doors into the cab. Even a smaller detonation could blow clinker and hot coal out the fire door, burning anyone on the footplate and forcing an emergency stop. A bigger one might fracture the firebox or set off nearby ammunition wagons. Railway crews were fast and skilled, but their margin was thin. In blackout conditions with iced rails, a sudden steam loss could turn a heavy train into a weapon against itself. The German rail system could not inspect its way out of this. A single locomotive might take several tons of coal for a long run, and yards turned wagons fast to keep up with demand. Guards could watch gates and search pockets, but they could not weigh every lump or X-ray tenders. Breaking every large chunk before use would slow operations to a crawl. Allied planners understood the psychology that would follow. If a crew could not trust the fuel, then every shovel was a coin flip, and the flip would echo through schedules. Distribution networks made it global within the war. French, Belgian, and Polish resistance cells tucked pieces into stockpiles and depots. Some also aimed at factory boilers and power stations. The OSS pushed Black Joe toward theaters where American agents had reach. The idea was not to rack up a single day's carnage, but to spread a persistent, invisible hazard. Counterintelligence pressure was anticipated. Once whispers of explosive coal circulated, the fear would begin to do work on its own, slowing hands and tightening throats. The beauty, harsh as it was, lay in the deniability of randomness. After a blast, what remained was coal and iron, the same as any accident, unless someone knew where to look and why. Back to France, the night before the blast. In a siding screened by frost-stiff hedges, a laborer hefts a bucket into a coal wagon, glances at the guard tower, and turns away. A single dark lump disappears under a slide of fuel. Hours later, stevedores trundle the wagon to a fueling track and pull a lever. Coal thunders down a chute, filling the locomotive's tender in a black waterfall that hides every secret it carries. The crew knows their route, their speed, their deadlines. The fireman trims the fire with practiced taps of the shovel, keeping the bed bright, knowing the grade ahead will demand more. A station passes in a smear of lamps. The engine drinks coal rhythmically, the driver keeping an ear on the beat of the exhaust, a hand on the throttle, a boot against the firebox door. Somewhere in the tender, an ordinary-looking lump tumbles to the top. The fireman swings the shovel, scoops, and with a lift-and-throw motion sends it into the orange mouth. It lands not like glass, but like stone. It settles into the burning bed and disappears under fresh fuel, indistinguishable from the rest, give or take a few seconds. Heat begins its work. The shell chars, the binder smokes, the hidden igniter wakes and races its short course toward the detonator. There is no warning whistle for this. A flat slap of force hits the firebox, and the door flies open. A geyser of flame and cinders blasts into the cab, and then the world turns white with steam. Hands go to eyes and ears, but there is no time. The driver slams the brake, and his foot slips on cinders, while the locomotive, suddenly crippled, lunges with locked wheels toward a point it cannot make. Behind, wagons concertina hard. A medical supply car bursts and spills bandages like snow as an ammunition wagon bounces and pitches off the ballast. At the wreck site, men with armbands and rifles pick through the mess. They find no cut wires, no planted timers, only coal dust, twisted tube ends, and a boiler burst from the wrong direction. Days later, in a different yard, a foreman orders bigger lumps smashed before shoveling. He is behind schedule, and the sledgehammer crew is short, and the chute is calling. A piece slips through anyway. On the main line near a river bridge, a smaller blast pops the firebox door, blows embers into the cab, and sears the fireman. The driver coasts to a halt and calls for rescue. A week on, 200 miles east, a freight crew whispers about devil coal. They tap each big lump with a hammer and listen for a hollow ring. But the night is cold, the gloves are thick, and sound lies. Another lump meets flame. This time the blast ruptures tubes and fills the cab with soot and grit. The engine cannot hold pressure, and the train sits blocking the line until a relief engine arrives. One depot tries screening coal over mesh. Chunks drop, dust pours, tempers fray, and someone orders the mesh lifted because the backlog is a problem worse than the rumor. In a factory town, a furnace trembles under a sudden internal bang. The fire wardens drench the grate, production stops, and the works manager fumes at an accident he cannot explain. German investigators send memos with theories about scale buildup, poor water treatment, overfiring. Experts arrive, inspect, and leave with hands blackened by the same answer. Nothing that proves sabotage. Field crews improvise. Some throw the first few shovels away to clear the top of the tender. Others hoard small pieces to avoid big lumps. All of it costs time. Railways love timetables, and timetables hate fear. A 10-minute safety ritual multiplies across districts and becomes hours of delay in the system's arteries. Resistance couriers keep seeding the flow. A wrought iron gate opens at dawn, a cyclist coasts past, a paper bundle drops into a coal scuttle in a wash of dust, and no one notices. In the Balkans, an agent swaps a lump during a midnight refuel, then walks away dirty and whistling. A month later, a column stops in a valley and a message travels back along telegraph wire. Blockage, locomotive disabled. Even when a coal piece fails to detonate, the rumor does the work. Firemen flinch at every crack from the firebox and keep the door partly open, losing heat, drinking more fuel, running late. A security officer drafts an order forbidding all unofficial coal handling. It reads strong in the office, but in the yard, the only thing that moves trains is a shovel in a human hand. Meanwhile, Allied labs tweak the recipe. Shells become tougher against rough handling, but eager to die in flame. Igniters become more consistent in hot gas and less sensitive to stray sparks. Agents refine tactics. They aim at depots feeding troop movements, at marshalling yards before offensives, at coal wharves where German control is almost absolute, but busy enough to hide a moment's sleight of hand. Priority targets include locomotives with leading roles, fast freight engines, troop train haulers, switchers that make yards breathe. Disabling those forces, ripple effects, tricks spread sideways. A fake coal lump disappears into the scuttle of a building's boiler house. The blast shuts heat to barracks and rolls late-night fatigue through a regiment. By 1944, whisper meets paper. Reports circulate among German railway offices acknowledging the phenomenon, recommending vigilance, and assigning responsibility without giving crews new tools. On some lines, a locomotive crew adopts a ritual, a quick toss of a suspect-looking chunk onto the ballast. It feels safer until a supervisor writes them up for wasting fuel. Winter deepens, coal degrades, and judgment gets worse. Wet coal steams and crackles. Any odd sound could be danger, or it could be a frozen piece venting moisture. A fireman, sleepless and jumpy, feeds small scoops to build a fire. The boiler loses head, the driver frowns, and the schedule slides right by minutes that cannot be made up. All the while the system groans under other loads, bomb damage to bridges, shortages of spare parts, Allied air attacks on marshalling yards, explosive coal wedges into that stress like a crowbar. The method requires no radio report, no last-minute signal. Once seated, it rides the rails inside an assumption. Fuel is safe, until it is not. In a final ugly irony, a crew that suspects sabotage has no good response but delay. The only way to be sure is to not shovel, and not shoveling means not moving. The idea had a cruel genius. By handing the enemy a choice between speed and certainty, it made certainty cost time the Reich could not afford. Even late in the war, when oil shortages worsened and some routes experimented with alternative fuels, most locomotives still burned coal. The disguise remained valid until the last winter. After the blast in France, security squads cordoned the site and questioned yardmen for hours. The locomotive was written off, the crew were buried, and a report cited boiler failure under stress. Records vary on the exact number of locomotives disabled or destroyed by such events. In following weeks, other unexplained firebox detonations were logged in separate districts without a connecting thread. The wider effect mattered more than a single wreck. Every station master who added 10 minutes to every refuel, every fireman who hesitated at the shovel, paid that cost into a bank of delays the German rail system could not clear. Procedures shifted in response. Coal handling tightened, spot inspections increased, and crews were briefed to avoid large unbroken lumps when possible. But none of it removed the basic vulnerability. The pragmatic lesson was harsh and simple. Logistics runs on routine, and routine can be poisoned. If you can turn a system's trusted inputs into liabilities, you slow the whole machine. For more cold-blooded ingenuity from World War II, subscribe and join me for the next operation.